Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to today's panel discussion. And now we would like to turn towards the conflict in a much different sense. So far we have talked about how the war affects our lives, and we sort of touched upon the idea of how long this war could last, but now we truly try to find the answer for the question, how long will the war in Ukraine last? And for this discussion, our moderator is going to be Dr. Raimund Kiss, head of the Center for Diplomatic Studies at MCC. Please welcome all the panelists on the stage.
Thank you, Bence. So it gives me a great privilege to welcome you all here today. And first of all, I'd like to introduce our great experts, the panelists. Next to me, Daniel Barta, President, Center for Euro-Atlantic Integration and Democracy. Anton, Bendarzsevszkij, Research Director at Oeconomus Economic Research Foundation. Our dear colleague, Dr. Attila Demkó, Head of the Center of Geopolitics here at MCC. Dr. Csaba Moldic, who actually recently, today, joined us as the Head of the Center of International Economy. So we truly have great experts here, and I really like to encourage you to use the Q&A session and use the unique opportunity to ask questions. Gentlemen, the first question is just a warm-up, easy one. Are the economic sanctions imposed on Russia effective? As we call it in Hungarian, költői kérdés.
Thank you very much for the easy question, and thank you very much for the invitation. Yes, I believe, and most of the data by now is showing that the sanctions are effective. What is especially effective is the sanctions on exporting certain products to Russia, and it's very important as we see that the Russian defense industry is very much missing these products. That is very important from the perspective of the war. But I believe all of the other sanctions are working quite well, although they never meant to be paralyze Russia in a short run. So the sanctions never work like that. And many of them are not yet introduced fully. So we will see once those sanctions start to be in effect, then they will definitely going to hurt Russia even more.
Anton, please.
Well, depending what is your exact question regarding sanctions. Are they preventing Russia from continuing the war? In this sense, in this regard, no, they are not working, because you can see Russia is continuing the war, and even more, the escalation is ongoing. So no, in this regard, they are not working. Have the sanctions crippled or collapsed the Russian economy? No, they haven't. So in this regard, we can say that they are not working. But in terms of if they are making the economic situation much worse for Russia, yes, they do work. As we can see, even from Russian internal reports prepared, for example, by Financial Ministry of Russia, they calculating that basically three scenarios, and out of three, only one is more or less positive, by which Russia will go back to pre-war results or GDP in 24, 2020, 25. And the other two scenarios, meaning that Russia will go back to the pre-war economic output only after 2030, which means that Russia has lost 10 years of its time, which it's hell lot for a country. So yeah, I do think that the sanctions won't prevent Russia from continuing the war, but definitely they are hurting Russia, and they are damaging the economy and making sure that Russia will fall behind the rest of the world in terms of their economy and their development.
Attila, what do you think?
Well, Russia was more resilient after the 2014 sanctions than we thought, than the West thought. And actually, Russia is more resilient now. The Russian economy will decline this year, about 5%, but not the 10 or 11% that was forecasted. Also, we have to see that this is less than the decline of many large European economies during the COVID crisis. So several countries declined by 10% of GDP during the COVID crisis. So this is a big hit for Russia, but it's definitely not something that can stop the war. So I would say that a part of the sanctions are working and they are good and have to be maintained on a very long term. I agree that the technology sanctions are the most important, then the sanctions on the regime and their life, which means that they cannot visit their nice dachas on Biarritz and Marbella and any other place which are the most expensive in the world. So of course their life standard declines a bit, and that creates tensions within the regime. But in terms of what we tried with energy, and even the idea of energy sanctions actually hurt Europe more than Russia, and it will continue so in the future. So I think we have to ask the questions: which sanctions are working, and even those that are working will not stop the war. And there are some sanctions and ideas which actually hurt Europe more. So actually we hurt with these sanctions Ukraine more, since Europe is the hope of Ukraine on the long term for rebuilding and for now just to keep Ukraine above the water. Can we imagine how the European voters will think in 3 or 4 months if there will be real cold in the schools and industrial production will drop? So anyway, I think that part of the sanctions policy was not well thought through. The other parts are hitting Russia, but will hit Russia on the long term. So Russian technological sector is going to be more dependent on China and never going to reach. I think Russia will, not for a decade, for decades, will lose hope of catching up to the West, if there was a hope anyway. I'm not sure about that, if there ever was a hope, but now with this there is zero hope.
Csaba, please.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me on this panel. So I tend to agree with Anton and Attila. So in the sense that the Russian economy would crumble in a few months, for sure, the sanctions don't work. And there's only one idea that, or thought that I would like to add to the discussion at this point, is that it very much depends on the reaction of the world. In that sense, not only the West. So the Russian economy is an open economy, but not only to the West, but even to the East. So if you look at the figures, then you can see that there's already adjustment process is happening, taking place right now. And that process actually started a few years ago. So these are actually the last day or the last moments of this adjustment. So, and technology can matter, obviously, but the reaction and the response of the Chinese decision makers is crucial in that sense. Thank you.
Csaba, let me stay with you just for a minute. What is the direct impact of the Ukrainian war on the Chinese economy? And then later we are going to talk about the direct impact of the Hungarian and the European. But you should know that Csaba's main research area is the EU and Chinese economic relations. So what do you think about the impact on the Chinese economy?
So before getting to the direct impact, I would like to say a few words about the state of the Chinese economy right now. So if you look at the figures, then you can see that, for example, Goldman Sachs downgraded the Chinese economy, the GDP forecast for the Chinese economy this year. But China is not alone with that. So this is let's say, this is a gloomy outlook in the world economy. So there are several problems that the Chinese economy has to face. Obviously, the continuation of the zero COVID-19 policy. Secondly, there are still tensions in the property market. Thirdly, we can also add that the global demand is weaker. Global demand and domestic demand is weaker. And that's the reason why the Chinese government adopted 33 boosting as measures to boost the economy in May, and 19 measures in August, again, to boost the economy. So, but if you look at the trade, for example, so yes, the Chinese economy is a cooling down period, which means that in August, for example, exports only grew by 7% compared to the same months in the previous year. And this is cooling down compared to July, when they still had 18%. And the trade surplus is around 80 billion American dollars in August, which is again down from 101 in July, which was actually the all-time record for China. So if you look at this data, then you can see that yes, there is an impact, but this impact is rather indirect when it comes to the growth. And the direct impact obviously can be seen in the import of energy sources. So if you look at the data, the Russian share in Chinese oil import was 6% in 2011. Then 10 years later, then 16, right? And then after the war, so this is the latest figure, was 21 in August. So obviously there's a huge adjustment. Actually, 2 years ago I read funny, maybe not funny for us, but a funny article on the Chinese government who wants to raise the export quotas for refined oil, meaning that they are buying oil, crude oil from Russia, refined, and sell it for European partners. And yeah, and obviously they buy more LNG, so they bought 60% more LNG this year than the last year, and 6% more coal than last year. So what is happening right now, in 2 sentences? That basically the West is reshaping the global fuel market, and China must adjust to that and try to benefit from that. Yeah? Thank you.
Thank you. So let's travel back to our beautiful country, Hungary and Europe. And the question is the same, and I promise we are going to later talk about geopolitics and security and politics as well. So, what is the impact of the Ukrainian war on the Hungarian, European, and the world economy? I know it's a very comprehensive question. We would be able to talk about for days, but just in a few sentences, if you share your view, gentlemen, yeah, all of you.
Well, definitely.
You choose European, Hungarian, or the world economic. How do you see the trend?
Yeah, well, we've seen that generally the economic climate and the crisis globally is a problem, and I think you discussed this in the previous panels quite extensively. But obviously, when it comes, and I tend to focus on the geopolitics and geoeconomic impact, definitely this war primarily hurts Europe and primarily hurts, including Hungary, and primarily hurts Central Europe in many sense because of the geographical proximity to Russia and Ukraine. So when it comes to the impact, the long-term impact, it's definitely going to further boost the speed of Europe becoming quite irrelevant in the world economics. But this is just something that is basically making these trends faster right now. And always a crisis, well, never. There is the saying in Europe that never miss an opportunity of a good crisis. I don't know. I think. It's
a famous Churchill quote.
Yes, but I don't think that what is the good opportunity here. Many says that we can boost the green transformation, and that will give us some better situation in the competition in a later stage. I'm not sure. I think the whole procedure started bad in the green transformation, and now as we have to boost it or increase the pace in not in a good level, it doesn't really work. It's often said that sometimes leading the change costs much more than being following, because the technological R&D costs and other costs are so high. And I think now this is just too big of a speed to really use it as an opportunity. Generally, it's very bad for Europe.
It's too painful lesson. Anton?
Well, I'm quite negative in this regard. I think that the continuous growth and continuous development, the well-being of European citizens, which we've seen in the last decades, it's over. So probably at least for the next years ahead. So probably the decade of these 2020s will be quite painful. And it's not only because of the war, but it's an ongoing trend. At first there was a global pandemic. And then, it's already when you are hurt and you are lying on the floor and somebody just kicks you again. The war came at very, very bad timing. And of course, with the war came inflation, uncertainty on the markets. And then of course we have to look at everything which in global economic share belong to Ukraine and Russia and Belarus as well. So it's of course energy resources. So the energy went up, and it affected everything. It affected inflation, food inflation, logistics. And then we have to speak about food crisis. Russia and Ukraine are the biggest exporters of food. So even though that probably in Europe we won't feel the lack of certain products, so probably we won't be in a position of being hunger. But definitely the price of all these products are going up, and it's already above 30% inflation. We have to speak about fertilizers. Belarus and Russia was the biggest exporters in the market. Russia produced 45% of global fertilizers. It's huge. And according to sanctions, right now we are not buying them. It's because they are under sanctions. Belarus was responsible for 18% of fertilizers. And again, it will affect us if, for example, the weather conditions won't be perfect. And we've seen that during this year that if we don't have rainy weather, then we'll have bad production phase. So all of this affecting and will affect and of course speaking about rare metals, lithium. Ukraine has the biggest lithium deposits in Europe. And we can continue everything, but it won't stop during the war. We will feel, even if the war has ended, we have to restore all the supply chains. We have to go back to normal, and it will take long. And yeah, it will be very painful for next years.
Well, I'm not an economist, but the data looks... For Hungary, it looks quite okay. For this year, it's going to be 5.1 or 2% growth, which is quite high on a European level. But next year, there is going to be a steep fall. But maybe Hungarian growth will remain above zero, so it's going to be about 1.2%. So Hungary will not go into recession if something does not happen during the winter. And there are many unknowns how Russia will retaliate after whatever happened at Nord Stream 1 or 2. It seems that Russia is cutting most or all gas exports to Europe. And of course, Hungary is very much dependent on Russian gas and oil, actually. So for us, these are two big unknowns. And for Europe, it's a big unknown how hard Russia will cut on the long-term relations with Europe. So we just speak about our own sanctions, and we believe that we are that strong. But Russia has a huge impact on not only on gas and oil globally, but nuclear fuel. Actually, Hungary, we just got our nuclear fuel from Russia 3 days ago or 4 days ago. So we are okay for 2 years, maybe now with our Paks power plant, which produces almost half of the energy of the country. But if I were Slovak or Czech, I would be a bit worried if next time there will be any technical misstep from the Russian side that they cannot deliver the nuclear fuel. And also, there are many other Western countries that needs Russian energy, including nuclear fuel. I think it's like 46% of uranium used in nuclear power plants is coming from Russia. So we have to be always we have to see always the big picture. So Russia has tools. And if they use these tools, at least for a few years, until we establish the necessary industrial response, which technologically United States and Europe is capable to do the same as Russia, but we didn't do it for a long time. I mean, in terms of the fuel cycle, nuclear fuel cycle. So there can be a few tough years, but even if it does not happen, I totally agree with Anton that the bad years are here for at least a decade. So much slower growth, much more problems, not only because of the Russian-Ukrainian war and COVID, so these are two big, very negative impacts, but otherwise there are very big problems in the world economy. China is slowing down, there are internal problems within China. Major African countries like Ethiopia and Nigeria are extremely unstable. So I think we have a perfect storm. It's more like a geopolitical storm globally, but it also translates to an economic storm. So everything is interrelated. Of course, high food prices will lead to more problems in several countries, especially in Africa and the Middle East. High fuel prices also, lack of fertilizers will lead to less. In many agricultural land in this autumn, there is zero fertilizer put in by the farmers. Can you imagine the impact if it stays for years? There was much less fertilizer in Hungarian agriculture even during the spring time. So I think if it continues like that, we're going to have lower and lower yields, not only in Hungary, globally. That will mean, again, higher food prices, more problems in many, many countries, with extremely high population growth and divided societies. So I'm pretty pessimistic about the 10-year outlook of the world economy because of these factors.
Thank you. Csaba?
Thank you. Kenneth Galbraith, the American economist, once said that the only purpose of macroeconomic forecasting is to make astrology more respectable. So this is the point where I am afraid of giving any future scenario, but I agree with Attila, and definitely. So when it comes to these two spheres, economy and politics. So politics basically determines things in the short run, right? And now we are at this stage. Yeah? In the long run, obviously, business calculation, business decisions get the upper hand and can influence politics. But Hungary is a good example, because if you look at the Hungarian economic foundations, they are very solid. But still, you cannot give any positive outlook if you look at the politics. So labor market is okay, investments are okay, etc., etc. So still, so this is not the point where we can give a clear picture. Usually, if you look at the forecast, they will give you some help for a few years, but not at this point.
Thank you. Okay, I will change the order because it's one of my favorite. We are going deeper and deeper. And you know what? I would like to ask Anton, first of all, what do you think about President Putin's statement yesterday? You see, we are getting deeper. It's the economics for the beginners, and now it's politics.
Is somebody here from the audience heard what Putin was speaking? Yes, many of you. Okay, I see the hands. Well, yeah, he said many things, so it was over.
We have time. It's
okay. It was more than half an hour of speech. after he's 15 minutes late. But anyway, I think we can draw two main conclusions from everything what he said. The first one being that he didn't speak too much about Ukraine. Interestingly, because, well, it was about annexation of 4 Ukrainian territories. But his main message and majority of the time he spent with the speech was about the West, the so-called collective West, the NATO. And according to this speech, we can draw a conclusion that for Putin's Russia right now, the West is the main enemy right now, because he was speaking about countering the West. He was speaking about what the West did, what the West tried to do with Russia, and that Russia won't be prisoner of the West. He was speaking about colonialism, that the West is still, and mainly United States, are still occupying Germany, South Korea, Japan, and this is a form of neo-colonialism, and Russia was always against colonialism, and so on. So the main one, the first conclusion is we can surely declare that for Russia, openly, the West is the enemy #1 right now, according to his speech. Because previously, well, it was kind of natural process. Because from the first years of Putin, he was quite friendly towards the West, and looked like the relations are prosperous. And even though there was an idea to include Russia into the NATO, right, and create a big economic space between Lisbon to Vladivostok. And then starting from 2007, this rhetoric started to change. He was speaking about the United States-led world order, and continuously his thoughts, his ideas were getting, well, at least openly, were getting more and more radical. So while for example, at the Valdai Forum in 2014, he was speaking about the West trying to force Russia to do some things. Now he's openly speaking about making a war with the West and possible consequences of a war. So that's my conclusion #1, and the conclusion #2, according to his speech, is that Russia is trying to forge a union, trying to forge a role in the world being led by Russia against the West. So he was speaking about, as I mentioned, decolonization, and that there are some countries which are against America-led world order, and Russia is supporting all these countries. They are supporting a multipolar world order. Well, that's not new, because he was speaking about multipolar world order before as well. But now it looks like, because of the war and the support of Ukraine by Western countries, Russia, he positions Russia in the front line against the West, and he, according to Putin's position, he's the one who is trying to unite everybody who's against the West. So I think these are the main two conclusions which we may draw, and I can tell you that's nothing good what will happen about that, because this is a point of no return. It's very hard to find an exit point out of it.
Before I ask Dr. Demkó, our good friend Attila, if he wants to add something, you may know that if you have any question regarding Putin's future, you may ask Dr. Demkó. He's also a great novelist. And before actually the war started, he published his 3rd book, but in this topic, if I'm correct, the 2nd one, The Fury of the Tsar. So you estimated, you already knew that he will start the war. So anyway, Attila, would you add something regarding yesterday's statement from President Putin?
Well, actually, I felt that he is going to do something, but I never thought that he's going to start such type of aggression. I thought that he's going to do everything to hit Ukraine.
And by the way, he didn't pay me anything to advertise his book.
Yeah,
so
it's a surprise.
Very nice. It's just a friendly gesture. This is MCC culture. You can fail it. Yeah, it's a family culture.
But yeah. So what I always believe that he made a decision basically after 2008, after the Bucharest Summit, that he's gonna counter the West with all necessary means, including war, and that's what happened in Georgia. And when the war happened in Georgia, I wrote an article that the next Crimea should be in line. And when Crimea happened, I was sure that he's gonna sink Ukraine on the long term. I never thought that it's gonna be such open warfare, but that's what he chose, and I think he's all in. And that speech is basically a final message of war from Putin, that he's all in and he will continue his mission as long as he can. So I don't think that there is return for Putin at all to the negotiating table, and until he's the leader of Russia to the negotiating table. He will try to win on the battlefield in Ukraine first, and then on the economic battlefield, which is much less certain for Russia, to say the least, but also with creating an alliance with China and others, Iran, Myanmar, some other lesser powers, but still important powers. So he's organizing the resistance to the American-led Western order. But of course, Russia, in that sense, is a weak country. So Russia is a strong country if we compare it to Ukraine, of course. But Russia is proving its military weakness and relative to the American strengths, of course. And Russia is proving that it's not as organized as I think they thought. So anyway, still he's all in. That speech shows that we are way beyond the point of no return. But I think he went beyond the point of no return on February 24th. So maybe there was a sliver of hope for a few weeks after that. But I don't think that there is anything now anybody can do except trying not to widen this war to a third world war, which we of course must avoid by all means, because that's the only area where Putin is really strong. I mean, the nuclear area. That's it. That equals the American force, and we shouldn't try out if it is as usable as the American or the European. So I think we are in dangerous times, and this speech shows how dangerous these times are, and we really need calm heads now in the West. And we can only hope that the heads are calm in Moscow. I'm not sure about that at all.
Today is 1st of October, a beautiful day. Actually, 40 years ago, Helmut Kohl, 1st of October 1982, became a German chancellor. And he said that we will not be able to reach peace in Europe without Russia. But as far as we can see, we cannot have peace with Russia either at the moment. So what do you think about the statement, if you would like to add something about yesterday's Putin statement?
Yesterday's Putin statement, I thought...
I promised to Csaba easy questions, so you guys get the hard one.
Yeah, I think I'm always skeptical to have big conclusions about speeches that intend to speak with his local crowd, with his people, and therefore I think we have to see this speech and its messages as necessary messages to the Russian public to a little bit decrease the internal pressure and dissatisfaction as well. And obviously, by creating a larger enemy, it's necessary. Telling the crowd that we were fighting with Ukraine and we failed, more or less, it's not a good message as a politician. Telling the crowd that we actually have to fight with the collective West, and that's why it is so painful, and that's why we have to pay the price for the long term. It's something that is necessary at this point for him. So I would rather see this speech through this lens and through the lens of failures and military failures. Definitely, I think for sure, and we said it many times, that Russia cannot win this war. Russia can make us it painful, and we can see the differences, and that's clear from the speech as well, and we can draw this conclusion that the differences that were quite huge previously, and that's why we were talking about continuously about US politics and reset policies over and over in the past decades, now become clearly antagonistic, and there is no solution for a very long time. So talking about ever again about any reset policy or normal relations with Russia seems to be very unrealistic, at least for the upcoming decades.
So
It's also a trust issue, unfortunately, and reputation these days.
just a quick remark, yes. At the beginning of the war, the main narrative of the Russian government was towards the population is that Russia is fighting against the so-called Ukrainian Nazis, right? And right now, if you watch the Russian media, the main message for the mobilization is that we are fighting the war with the NATO. I think this is a very dangerous change of perception, and showing that the country is going in a very escalating military direction.
Csaba, would you like to add something?
So there is no Chinese reaction yet to this speech, but we can go through to some of the Chinese reactions to the Ukrainian war. So first of all, we can start with this phrase, the no limits, which we can find in this joint communication, which was issued after or during the Winter Olympic Games, before the war started. And this phrase has two main interpretations. One saying that this is an alliance between China and Russia, but without saying the word alliance. The second one would be the interpretation, this is much more than friendly, good bilateral relations, but it's very far from alliance. And I tend to agree with the second one. And if you look at the reactions of China to the annexation of Crimea, there's something that you cannot find in the speeches of Russian diplomats and Russian politicians. But if you talk to Russian scholars and academics, academicians, so they will tell you that there was a disappointment and disillusion about the Chinese behavior because they thought that China will bail out Russia, and they didn't. So if you look at the Chinese reactions as a whole, so you can see that there are two layers. The one is a high politics supporting Russia, clearly, bravely. And the second layer is the layer of companies, Chinese companies, who are very cautious, especially those who have markets in the United States, so because they are afraid of being sanctioned by Americans. So they are the two layers, and I don't think that will change too much. They are waiting on the sidelines and waiting for the outcome. So this is one layer. The second layer is obviously, again, the long term, because this is the short term. The long term is, if you look at the changes in the Chinese economic development strategy, and the phrase or the catch word here would be the dual circulation. So the dual circulation is basically was supported and popularized by the Chinese president, saying that the Chinese economy has two loops, circles, the inner one and the external one. And when I talked about this concept a year ago, one of the students said, let's quote him, this is bullshit, yeah, quote ends. And actually he was right, because these dual circulation, inner circle, external circle, this is basically the description of every open economy. But the point he was missing was that the emphasis is increasingly put on the domestic part. Yeah? And it does have two interpretations. The one is that this is a decoupling as a response to the American decoupling from China. And obviously, China tries to make a shift towards higher value chains. And this is one part of the story. And the second is obviously strategic independence, technological independence, yeah, or technological autonomy. And the irony of the situation that as the United States is pushing China and, for example, denying access to technologies, this is the point where actually China will do it on its own. Let me give you two historic examples. In the 60s, China wanted to have nuclear weapons from the Soviet Union, and they simply denied. They made it. Then in the early 90s, they also wanted the technology of rockets from the Americans. Again, they said no. So what the United States can achieve with that is only delaying the Chinese development, the Chinese technological development. Thank you.
Thank you. Your comments actually made me think about a very unique player in this unfortunate game, and I wouldn't call it even a game, in this really horrible situation. And this is Turkey. And through my diplomatic lenses, President Erdogan plays a very, very interesting role. So, and the question goes first to Attila, if you don't mind. So what's the role and aim of Turkey in this war? I mean, Turkey is a member of the NATO, a very influential one, a very strong member of the NATO. And correct me if I'm wrong, President Erdogan is the only president or representative of a country from NATO who was able to negotiate personally with Putin, and within a week with President Zelensky, actually including the UN Secretary General. So his involvement is very interesting. So the country who distributes drones for civilian purposes, you never know, and in the meantime, he's sitting, he's Putin's dacha and discussing the future cooperation. So what is the aim and role of Turkey in the war, Attila?
Well, Turkey's aim, of course, is to get as much power out of it as possible. That's very natural. We must see that there are some similarities between Russia and Turkey in terms of history. So Russia is an imperial power, a great power for centuries, and Turkey, I mean the Ottoman Empire, was a great power, actually a superpower for centuries. We always forget that the Ottoman Empire, just like 300 or 400 years ago, was the strongest military power in the world. Stronger than any European country. Actually, a coalition of European countries pushed the Ottoman Empire out of this very city. Not one European country, not Austria, not, of course, the Hungarians, but Germans, Poles. A huge European coalition could defeat only the Ottoman Empire. And I think, in some ways, President Erdogan is rebuilding at least part of this Ottoman Empire. We can see how they move in Syria, how they move in Azerbaijan, in the question of Armenia, which is again now an open question after the Armenian defeat 2 years ago. Again, we saw a defeat of Armenia in the last few weeks, and this is impossible without Turkey, all this. So Turkey is a major player, and they have their own game. So they are not playing the game of the United States, they are not playing the game of Russia, and of course they don't play the game of Ukraine at all. Of course they give Bayraktar drones to Ukraine, and they support Ukraine, and Erdogan was very clear of saying no to the annexation, even to the annexation of Crimea. But you have to see that in Crimea he also sees a bit of Turkish history, since Crimea was an Ottoman dependency. So if we look at which, I'm sorry, I hope Ukrainians will not be offended, or I don't care so much about Russians, but Crimea for the longest time, if you look at today's historical countries and nations, was Crimean Tatar. and in the sphere of the Ottoman Empire, in the sphere of Turkey, not in the sphere of the Slavic world, or I mean Russia or Poland. Because at the time it was Poland and Russia which bordered that region. So anyway, sorry for this long historic background, but it's very important to see what is the mindset of President Erdogan, and he talks to Putin in a way like the Sultan talked to the Tsar. So these are two very strong characters. These are two very strong leaders within their own countries, but both of them has big trouble, economic trouble, and political also, I think, even in Turkey. So he has to play, he's playing a game just to maximize Turkish power, to maximize Turkish influence, and I think he's doing it very well, because he's the one who can talk to President Zelensky, to President Biden, to President Putin, and to President Xi. So he can talk to Beijing, to Washington, to Moscow, to Brussels less, but he can talk to everyone. So he's in a way in the middle while supporting Ukraine militarily. So I think it's a very clever game what Turkey plays, but it's also a dangerous game since Turkey has dependence on Russia in terms of energy. Russia is building a nuclear power plant. Russia is giving a lot of energy to Turkey, and of course Russia can retaliate Turkey in many ways if things go wrong, but also the West can retaliate if Turkey goes to the other side too much. So I think it's a game of skill what President Erdogan played so far, but we shouldn't overestimate Turkish power. It's big. It's a huge army, for example, the second army of NATO. But still, Turkey has the vulnerabilities of much lesser countries, especially in terms of economy.
Would you?
Yeah, I mostly agree with Attila, but we have to see that overall, Turkey supports more Ukraine, and definitely is challenging Russia. I think the fact that Azerbaijan could attack Armenia showed that it has the means and it has the willingness to challenge Russia. First of all, because from a geopolitical perspective, having a dominance in the Black Sea, a Russian dominance in the Black Sea is very bad for Turkey. Turkey wants to be the primary state of the Black Sea region, and with the territorial gains, this would be very soon challenged by Russia. So when you see the Turkish interest is to Ukraine regain as much territory as possible, weaken Russia as much as it's possible. Prior to the war, there was a very intense defense cooperation between Ukraine and Turkey. Turkey planned to build a number of defense industrial investments. They plan to produce even Bayraktars in Ukraine, but also other equipment. So the economic prospects with the cooperation with Ukraine is very high from a Turkish perspective. And also, when we talk about the Crimean Tatars, Turkey acknowledged a number of times that actually Crimean Tatars lived under much better condition under Ukrainian rule, and following 2014 they were granted a number of rights within Ukraine, although it was very much symbolic to prove to the West as well the Ukrainian respect of minority rights. We can talk about that as well, but overall, Turkey's interest is to support Ukraine more, but yes, they're playing a geopolitical game here.
Anton, a short comment, please. Actually, we have 9 minutes before we answer the audience questions, and I still have a few questions.
You are stressing me.
No, it's my job. Just pressing.
Well, I do agree with Donny and Attila. And I think Turkey is in a very unique position in this game, if you can go so. It's among the 3 countries which are benefiting the most of the war, namely United States, China, and Turkey. because of the economic relations still, and because of the weakening with Russia, the weakening of Russia. And as I mentioned, it's in a unique position because well, United States is it's the main antagonist, the main enemy of Russia right now, while China keeps somewhat neutral position, and Turkey is in between. It's part of the NATO. However, it didn't impose the sanctions against Russia, but it did close the Bosporus and Dardanelles. At the same time, it's supporting military Ukraine, and I think Turkey is in very much support of Ukraine, only based on the fact that strategically Turkey cannot let Russia to dominate the Black Sea region. That's the main strategic reason for Turkey to support Ukraine until the end, because they can't let it happen that Russia will take its hold on Kherson region, Odessa, and so on. It cannot happen from Turkish strategic perspective. And as Donny mentioned, it's quite interesting to see that Turkey is the main challenger of Russia in several regions, starting from Middle East to Caucasus to even to Central Asia. Yet Russia still maintains relationship with Turkey. Yet Russian tourists are coming. Well, Turkey became #1 destination for Russian tourists and for Russian businessmen. Basically, everybody who tries to escape from Russia but cannot go to the West. Some of them are going to post-Soviet countries like Georgia, Armenia. But basically, if they want to go to so-called almost West, that would be Turkey. So it's quite a unique position. In this regard, I think President Erdogan has very strong diplomatic positions. And as you have seen during the wheat deal, and even now, I think in Hungarian media it didn't really wasn't a media that the exchange of the prisoners of Azovstal. It was also done through Turkey. That's quite a big achievement from their side.
Thank you. I just would like to remind our students, especially my student, to look the last 5-7 years of the very hectic love affair between Russia and Turkey, with so many turbulences since just 2015, not historically the last 100 years. Okay, and this is my personal favorite to all of you. Why do not and did not the EU leaders initiated, engaged, facilitated, or actually, to be very honest with you, push the peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine? Daniel, please.
Well, it's very, very hard to push either side. I think Russians...
Okay, gently facilitate.
Yeah, well, I think we gently pressure...
Diplomatically facilitate.
Gently try to pressure Russia to start diplomatic discussion. I don't think it was open to that. And we ended up with sanctions and so on. So I don't think that either side was open. And it's hard to for many people, we translate this that Ukraine should basically withdraw, stop fighting, but they were attacked, they are in territorial defense. It's very hard to gently tell them to sit down, give up some of their territories and agree under Russian terms, because that would have meant from Ukrainian perspective. So I think we are still very far away being capable to push either side to sit down and start to negotiate. And therefore, we can have a lot of efforts, but it's, I think, senseless right now.
Actually, I ask EU leaders, but actually I should have asked Western leaders, including United States, or I don't mind. Anton?
I think actually we did. Our current knowledge shows that prior the war, at least half year prior the war, we knew, I didn't know, Attila didn't know, maybe Donny didn't know as well, that Russia will attack, but the CIA definitely knew it. And they were, at first, they were trying to force Russia to abandon these plans. As we know currently, there were several meetings with United States leaders, including CIA leaders, high-level representatives, and then when they didn't succeed, they went to the public, right? Since October last year, you read in the media that Russia may attack Ukraine. Russia may attack Ukraine, and then several leaders from Europe as well went to Putin trying to negotiate, including Mr. Orban. He also met with Putin, trying to negotiate energy prices, but as well trying to speak about situation in Ukraine, right? And when the war started, I think the room for maneuver decreased just drastically. I don't think in Europe we had the proper tool set after this. As Attila mentioned before, it was already a kind of point of no return when Putin massively attacked Ukraine. So I think maybe history will decide later that maybe something else might have been done. But prior to the war, I think there were a lot of efforts to trying to stop Russia.
I remember, but I also remember 29th of March in a beautiful palace in Istanbul. There was a very successful negotiation between Ukraine and Russia. It took about 5 hours, and they almost agreed 80%, including the future of Crimea. Anyway, we don't really have time, and I'm the moderator, unfortunately. So, Attila.
Well, I think we don't really know what is happening behind the scenes. So sometimes we believe that what we read, even in the most prestigious papers like the New York Times or Washington Post,
Attila,
is true.
You don't.
I don't, but I know very well that how little we really know about what is happening behind the scenes. I had the chance to read when I was doing my PhD. I was doing it in Washington, D.C., and I read the transcripts of declassified transcripts of President Nixon talking to world leaders. And you know, the picture is a bit different when you read all the transcript of a negotiation. Even with still today you have the blackouts, so not everything is readable. So I think we will know what happened when the archives will be opened maybe in 50 years. And when all the memoirs will be written, but even the memoirs, I can say they are not always reliable. So we don't know. I'm pretty sure that the Europeans try to push hard Russia not to attack and then to finish this war. And as for the Americans, I don't know, because the Americans were warning quite a lot about the coming of the war. But I didn't really feel that they try to stop it so strongly. But that's only a feeling. Maybe at the behind the scenes, the U.S. was doing everything to stop Russia. I don't know. But the only country which Russia listens to, there are two countries. It's the United States in a way and China. They don't care about all the others. Not much. Maybe Germany a bit. So you have to see that from the Russian point of view. Their eyes are in that height that they can only talk to United States and China as equals. That's what they believe. So for what the Europeans can do, I'm always very skeptical. Maybe Germany is a bit different, but not this German leadership. So I think Angela Merkel, she was taken seriously by President Putin. I'm not sure about this German leadership, but anyway, Russia feels in a different league than the European countries.
So sure. Just a quick thought that, from my opinion, you said you didn't feel that maybe United States made everything to stop it. Well, I thought for me, I think for United States in the last years, their main opponent number one was China, not Russia. That's why they wanted to prevent That's why in their interest was to prevent the possible conflict, because otherwise and actually that's what we are seeing. It strengthens China a lot, the current situation. And I think the United States wanted to avoid it with every possible meaning.
Daniel, one sentence, please,
yes,
and
and let's also admit...
1.5.
Let's also admit, and those who raise the voice to let's talk with Russia, were stoned by the Western public opinion and liberal media. I mean, look the example of Macron. He raised that maybe we should do something. It was not even concrete. Basically, everybody was bashing him for a week. So if they follow their self-interest as politicians, it's very hard to really stand before the public and talking about that we would like to see Ukraine and Russia sitting down and trying to make a peace, because that's the environment right now in Western Europe is not good for that.
Unfortunately, we have to agree on you. Csaba, one last comment.
Okay, 3 comments.
And I have just 80 questions from our beloved audience, so it's okay.
So only strengthening the argument of Attila, who said that Turkey basically tried to build an empire again. So we shouldn't forget the enhanced cooperation in the Turkish Council of the recent years. So this is one good proof. To Anton, the second comment. So you said that the China is neutral. I wouldn't use the word neutral. I would rather use the word pragmatic, meaning that if Russia or other partners would emerge victorious from the war, China would side with that partner or with that country. So, and the third comment, so I guess the NATO is built upon the principle of cultivated asymmetry, meaning that asymmetry between the partners in terms of military power spending, and that was cultivated or accepted actually until Trump, this is a good phrase, until Trump, yeah? So until the Trump administration, and now it's basically, it is a continuation of this policy. So we don't know what happened behind the scenes. It's obviously, it was, the majority of decisions was not taken or was not made by Europeans, or not in Brussels or in Berlin at all. Thank you.
Where we are in Budapest, I have to ask a very, very short question to you, Csaba, and one word. Would the war impact our relations with China, Hungarian-Chinese relations? That's quite important. I mean, we are in Budapest and Hungarian, so. And of course, we have great friends from abroad, but.
I hope not.
Thank you. That's a great answer. And I'm very grateful and proud for the turnout of the audience, and it's Saturday, so I don't think it's ever happened before. We had very successful, well-organized events. Friday was always full. I can't remember for Saturdays. So anyway, we have great questions. Obviously, the Nord Stream pipelines, okay. So, what do you think, who blew up the Nord Stream pipelines? And the next question, probably the Austrian lottery numbers, and who killed Kennedy?
The names as well?
Yes, names. Actually, only the names, not even the aim.
You
so
know
personally, who did that?
You know what Putin answered when he was asked in 2000 after the explosion of Kursk submarine, and he was asked what happened, and he said, it blew. It blew up.
Okay, so what do you think, who blew up the Nord Stream pipelines? What was the main motive behind this move? Who would like to answer first? I mean, Attila, would you like to?
I don't think that we can answer that question with any certainty.
That's why I ask you first.
Whose interest it is. So very honestly, I don't see Russian interest in it. That doesn't mean that it was not Russia, because there can be, let's say, debates within the regime, and those who want to continue the fight and break with the West may want to put an end to any debate with blowing up, because this is a link to Europe in a way, an economic link to blow up the last few links to Europe. But that's to me sounds maybe too strong. So I don't see really a Russian interest if we are logical. But of course, again, we don't know the Russian logic. I see a lot of Ukrainian interest in this, but of course, I don't see any Ukrainian capability on the Baltic Sea. I mean, that would be a real surprise if Ukraine had anything to do with it. And of course, there are the countries which have the capabilities. I'm pretty sure that the UK has the capability to do such a thing. United States, of course, has the capability, but even maybe Poland has the capability. So I'm pretty sure it wasn't Hungary. That's 100%. Our sea fleet is mostly under the Adriatic Sea and more than 100 years old. So I don't think it was us.
Then you plotted.
I personally feel anyway that this is an extremely significant event and a very dark one, because it puts another nail in the coffin of this bridge of no return, and it can also hurt European economy, because these are two important pipelines, but there are others, and they can be hit. Infrastructure in Ukraine can be easily hit by Russia or just by fighting. The Turkish stream has also vulnerabilities, of course the Turk stream. So we are up to a very, very bad winter, I'm pretty sure, in Europe. And there is, without these two pipelines, there is less remedy, because I just don't see Russia using the Ukrainian pipeline system to its full potential. It just wouldn't be President Putin to do this. And also, in the case of Yamal, which goes through Poland, I don't think that Putin would give $1 to Poland, even if he loses $100 himself. Of course, I'm speaking about billions, actually, and not a few dollars. So the short answer is I just don't know. I can imagine everything, but still I see it's more likely that it wasn't Russia.
Thank you very much. And the question was anonymous. The question came from Marcel. Daniel, would you like to?
Just only one thing. That's most likely not Russia. That I think agree on that. But the question is thinking about Russia and thinking about the Russian mentality and the mentality of retaliation policy means that there is a potential danger of Russia damaging other pipelines. Especially if they would like to hit Western Europe, the newly established pipeline between from Norway through Denmark until Poland is a good target on the Baltic Sea, and it's very hard to defend it. So what we should be afraid of is the secondary consequences if Russia would try to retaliate this attack.
I agree. Okay, Bent. Do we have to wait for the changes of political establishment, for example, death of Putin or US election in the US and Russia to achieve ceasefire at least? Anton?
Well, it's a bit provocative question, because then we think that Ukraine doesn't have any kind of.
This is what we teach here, you know, be provocative.
Yes, I do.
You have to question even the question.
I do not think that any kind of change in the United States would change the situation on the front lines, because one thing, even if another president is elected, United States public and establishment is very much anti-Russian, so it doesn't really change anything. And on the other hand, it's very much a question of the goals of Russia and the question of what Ukraine is going to do with it, because in this very situation, the annexation of 15% of Ukrainian territories, meaning size of a Hungary in Ukraine, is something which is absolutely not acceptable by Ukraine. So I do not think that from American side anything would change. I mean, if politics change, it doesn't affect the war. In case of Russia, definitely. I don't think there is an exit point for the current political leader, Vladimir Putin. So one of the only hopes is to the change in Russia. Right now I don't see any other exit point. Maybe one, China, because if we manage to negotiate, because everybody's talking about, or many of us talking about negotiation between United States and Russia, but why don't we talk about China and United States? Because if China pressures Russia, I think it could also change a lot in this very conflict.
Okay, you mentioned China. We have a question. Csaba, I would like to ask you to comment. Does China have stronger ties with Russia because of the enemy of my enemy is my friend mentally, or with the US because of the almost symbiotic economies?
I definitely don't think that. So if you look at the trade data, then you can see that China trades 10 times more with the United States than Russia. So the answer is simple. And when it comes to energy, so China has more options, much more options than we have. So, and there's one thing more that we should never forget if we speak of China, that if you want to find a country in the world which benefited most from the globalization process taking place between, let's say, 1990 and 2008, 2009, the global recession, though. This is definitely China. So if you think this way, so according to estimates, 400 million people have living standards which is very close or even above the European standards. So this is almost the European Union within China. So you could argue, okay, China has 1.4 billion people, but this is still achievement. And when it comes to the stability of the Chinese political system, it's obvious. So if you think this way, that those guys, let's say, in the age of us, only experience economic growth during their lives. So this is a very, very strong domestic support for the Chinese.
Just one humble comment to Csaba's answer. The early 80s, China export was, global export was as much as now the Italian. So this is the tremendous changes what Csaba just mentioned, and actually being pragmatic helps a lot.
Once I had a discussion with a Chinese professor at the same age, so born in 1971, and we discussed this. So I experienced the first oil crisis, the second oil crisis, then the Hungarian debt problems before the transformation, then the transformation, including Bokros package, then again some problems around 2000, then again the great financial crisis, 2008, 2000, then COVID-19, but he not. I mean, if you look at the track record of the Chinese economy, so it's basically amazing. That's true. Now they have problems. The growth is moderate, not robust, but that's all at this point.
We have an interesting one from Qatar. Will the EU stop sanctions if there is a civil unrest across the continent during the winter? Who would like to start? Daniel, Anton. As you wish. Daniel, please.
To be honest, I don't see that level of civil unrest. I mean, it's very hard to discuss. Definitely, there will be voices following this winter arguing against the sanction policy. There are already voices even from the UK coming out, but I don't see at this point such a big civil unrest coming on the horizon that would change overall this politics, and definitely not on a European level. So individually we can see certain countries might change how hawkish they are on these sanction policies, but overall I think Europe not.
Well, Europe has experienced something like this back in the 70s, right? When during the Israeli Arabic wars, the Arabic states cut all the oil supplies, and then we, I wasn't living at the time because it was before myself, but Europe survived, and they didn't change their support to Israel, and also United States hasn't changed their support to Israel. Because of the pressure coming from Arabic states, even when the petrol stations became empty and people didn't have a chance to tank their cars, and the prices in the shops went up. So I think, some might argue that it was a different situation because the level of well-being was not so high. We got used to different level of comfort. Well, I'm not sure. I think definitely we got used to it, but I don't think this is something, problems with heating, for example, this is something which might change drastically the narrative and the politics within the European Union. Maybe Attila has different opinion.
Well, I see that Europe is not united. There is a ideological, even we can say civil war within Europe. So, this is very important here. I think that some countries definitely feel that there were mistakes made with the sanctions package, and I'm not speaking only about Hungary. What we know for sure, and what can I tell the audience, that many times Hungary is the only one who talks, but there are 3 or 4 or 5 countries behind Hungary and who are saying that just keep up, keep up, keep up. So that's reality, believe me. And again, we have Italy with a new government, and of course, very pro-Ukrainian and strong on NATO in terms of rhetoric. But we will see the Italian moves. And also I see within European societies a big turbulence. Not only because of the economic issues, but because of political issues, migration. So I think Europe is much less united than in the 70s it was. And we have to see that this winter, we don't yet know the conditions of the winter. So if this winter is mild, then I think we can escape bigger consequences. We had mild winters for years. Maybe it's not going to be mild. I think that in the Kremlin, they are praying for a very cold winter for Europe. If the last winter were cold, we would be in a much worse situation even now, preparing for this winter. So I would say that, again, we don't know. I think that in many countries it's really hurting people now. People can feel it on their skin, what's happening, and that can change, of course, political attitudes. I don't know. We will see.
Can I ask another question from the audience? Shall we move on? Okay, good. So, question from Ibrahim Kail. Why did Germany sacrifice Nord Stream 2 and not mediated the US-Russia conflict to avoid Ukraine war?
Well, I think the policy of Germany in the last decades was built around the energy relations between Russia and Germany, and it failed. We can clearly say that, because it didn't prevent Crimea in 2014. While we thought that maybe Crimea will be the last thing to fulfill Russia's appetite. It wasn't. It didn't prevent the war. So I think that was the point when Germany reconsidered its policy towards Russia, and the very logic that the economic relations, the interdependency between Russia and Germany will help the world order and will help the long-term peace in Europe. So I think that's the main reason this kind of logic didn't work, and they changed it.
Okay. Szabó Bence. Is it you, Bence? Okay, Szabó Bence, what scenarios can you imagine for a ceasefire? 4 territories lost, only Luhansk and the Donetsk lost, Ukraine reclaimed? That's the question. Attila, would you like to answer?
Scenarios for a ceasefire in the foreseeable future, you mean in the next few months? Well, I think if something happens to Putin, that's one scenario. Otherwise, I just don't really see that. I mean, why Ukraine would stop? Right now, today, they are encircling Liman. They still have the upper hand in North Luhansk region. The Kherson attack was stopped. That's how it is today. But otherwise, Ukraine is not in a bad position. Of course, it can change with the incoming Russian forces, but both sides still strong enough to continue. So why would they stop? Why do for Ukraine anyway? I mean, and after the annexation, I think only a total defeat can change the Ukrainian mindset. If Ukraine is defeated on the battlefield, it has to sit down. If Russia is defeated on the battlefield, it has to sit down. But on the short term, I don't see either. Actually, I don't see a Russian defeat on the long term, with the except if the Putin regime stays in power, because then they will put us as much as much material as needed to at least to keep these 4 regions. So ceasefire, I think it's anything can happen, by the way. So I mean, there are sometimes great surprises, and we don't know again what is going behind the doors. It was a very surprising thing that Azov soldiers were exchanged for Medvedchuk and for others.
Suddenly, actually. Yep.
So it was a big surprise for me, because Azov soldiers are a big red line for Russian nationalists. They are totally and extremely angry now with Putin. Putin is pressured from the nationalist camp all the time to be harsher with Ukraine. So he's not the toughest guy on the block. There are many others. I think even within his own circle, I don't know what happened to Dmitry Rogozin, for example, who was a really tough.
Now, actually, they're saying that he will be the one responsible for the new administration of the 4 occupied regions.
Well, then if he's the one, then a hardliner is coming in. A real hardliner is coming in to do the job of, let's say, turning the occupation into something viable, which is going to be very hard. So what I'm saying, that there is really very little way for negotiations and for a ceasefire, except military defeat for one side or the other, or political collapse for one side or the other.
I agree.
Csaba, would China support Russia if there was a war between Russia and the West?
I can't answer the question, but I can explain why I can't answer the question.
Well, we would be very grateful and appreciate it.
Yeah. So what I try to explain here, so China's behavior is extremely pragmatic. So if you look at the Chinese interest is still the catch-up with the West economically, technologically, and obviously a war together with Russia against the West would go against the deepest Chinese interests. So, I mean, I know that the China is often described in the Western media as a very aggressive foreign power, but if you look at the track record, so for example, very simple question. So when was the last year when you could, for example, Chinese troops see on foreign soil, I mean, without the mandate of the UN? And the answer is 1978. So, and I don't want to raise the same question regarding the United States, but you already know the answer. So I definitely don't think that China would be involved in such a war.
Thank you very much. Next question. How much will Ukraine depend on the United States after the enormous financial and military aid?
Well, it will. When? When it comes to the.
I mean, even right now.
Yeah, right now it depends on that, but it's conditioned aid. So it's some of them it's basically adapt. They rely on the Russian U.S. equipment because the U.S. equipment is the best they can get. They could get alternatively German equipment. Germans are hesitant, slow in producing, slow in delivering, so they need U.S. equipment right now. But when it comes to reconstruction, they will much more rely on EU and Europe. So that's why I ask when. Until there is a fight, obviously, United States has the biggest army, has the most equipment on stock that they can potentially send into the conflict. They have the biggest influence in European allies, especially Central European allies, to support Ukraine. So right now it's huge, but when it comes to reconstruction, EU will be the most important stakeholder.
Well, I think we can compare Europe after the Second World War. How much are we reliant on United States? In terms of security, we are, because United States is the only country which provides nuclear protection umbrella above, well, not the only one, but basically the main country which provides a nuclear umbrella above Europe. So in terms of security, military, United States remain, even though many years has passed after the Second World War, but the United States remain the main partner in terms of military and security to Europe, and I think it will be the same case in case of Ukraine if the war will end. In terms of economy, well, for many European countries, United States is one of the main partners, economic partners, but this is the choice of Ukraine. They are going to the West. They want to be part of Euro-Atlantic integration. They want to be part of European Union, and I think it has already changed their economic relations towards Russia, right? So it was completely cut, and they rely now on economic relations towards European Union. So I think this will be the situation, but this is a trend which is ongoing in the last years.
Thank you very much. I promise to my dear colleagues from the International Directorate, I'll try to keep the time, and at the moment the time is up. First of all, thank you very much for a great audience, for the excellent, amazing turnout. We do appreciate it. And thank you very much for our distinguished panelists to contribute to our 2 days conference. Thank you very much.